W. Johnson and some guy by the name of Richard Hawes, who probably you've never heard of. These 5 men, despite what I've said about the title of the project and the fact that we focus on these 5 individuals, aren't necessarily the most important thing about CWGK. We use the governors more as a lens, their office as a lens to understand how ordinary people experienced the Civil War in Kentucky. Because if you know anything about Civil War Kentucky, it's a completely well-organized and tranquil place between 1861 and 1865 with no chaos and absolutely nothing that goes wrong or is crazy. You have signed up for a talk just full of bitter sarcasm. I hope that's been clear in the first couple of minutes that I have a very dry sense of humor. So Kentucky, right, is a very chaotic period between 1861 and 1865. And the governors offer us a great opportunity to see how ordinary people lived through the throes of civil strife. We always say that the governors, the office of the governors, sat at the intersection of these national events and everyday life. So as the process of emancipation is unfolding in Kentucky and throughout the South, as states in Kentucky are organizing military forces to wage and sustain a war, as they are raising funds or they're dealing with guerrilla warfare, which deeply impacts Kentucky. Governors deal with all of these things, but they're also dealing with mundane things, everyday things. People who get in drunken brawls. If you see, we have a Tuesday transcription on Facebook that the Kentucky Historical Society puts out when we have trouble trying to identify signatures or parts of documents. We throw it up on our Facebook. Today is one about a brawl in, I think it's in Covington, between men, that it involves a meat wagon, which I laughed very loudly when I was reading the document about a meat wagon. But right, people get in brawls, they get fines levied against them, they have their own individual affairs that may be completely unconnected to the war, and they're still writing to the chief executives. So we've compiled 10,000 documents. We've got another 10,000 that we have to annotate and fact check and upload onto the website. But we've got 10,000 documents right now that are up. So I'm going to pull from some of those today. I'm going to talk about Hawes, really focusing on that idea. Excellent, about George W. Johnson's portrait. We've got several portraits of the governors up in our office. One that we may, Beriah McGoffin, dress up like Santa Claus for Christmas. We call him Beriah Claus from time to time. So that is what CWGK is. I'm happy to answer some more questions about it if anyone has questions as we go along about what CWGK is, and I can give you the website address. I'll drop it in the chat later through the talk so you can access, and it is a freely accessible resource, I should note. So you can hop on it. We've had people who use it for genealogy. If you want to learn more about Civil War Kentucky, by all means, certainly hop on and use the site. But I'm here to talk about Richard Hawes in Bourbon County. So what I wanted to do is a little bit of a background about Richard Hawes in Bourbon County, things that you all may know, but as a good historian, right, I've got to lay my groundwork and make sure we're all operating on the same page. So quick bio of Hawes, quick bio of Bourbon County, run us through the Civil War. I promised Cheryl like 30 minutes. I'm probably going to go like 35, 40. I'm a historian. You're letting me talk. I'm just going to keep talking. But a couple things about Richard Hawes. He's born in 1797 in Caroline County, Virginia, to Richard and Clara Hawes. He'll live to the ripe old age of 80. He'll move to Lexington in 1810 with his family. While he's in Lexington, he'll spend some time learning at Transylvania University and clerking and working under Robert Wycliffe, a famous Kentucky lawyer. He'll marry Hetty Morrison Nicholas November 13th, 1818. He'll have a number of children, and Hawes will start his career in Lexington, becoming a lawyer, becoming a farmer and a businessman. He starts to become quite popular in Lexington. But the problem is the bar, the legal field is fairly crowded in Lexington. So in 1824, he's going to move to Winchester in Clark County, a little bit less crowded, and he can practice law there. But he can also launch a good political career. Starting in 1828 and in 1829 and 1836, Hawes is going to be elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives. Right? He's going to be elected to the General Assembly. He'll also serve from 1837 to 1841 as a member of the United States House of Representatives. He launches from Clark County a very respectable political career as a Whig in Kentucky. 1843, he'll move to Paris and into Bourbon County. And from there, he kind of connects into, again, as a lawyer, as an influential member of the Whig Party, but eventually he'll join the Democratic Party as the Whig Party collapses in the mid-1850s, right? Because what you've signed up for today is the collapse of the Whig Party and transitions in political politics in Kentucky. Hawes will join the Democratic Party, and he is an important lawyer, farmer, politician, and most importantly, a well-respected member of Bourbon County on the eve of the Civil War. He's been a politician. He has been a wealthy and influential individual. He's a slave owner in the 1850s. In all of these ways, right, he's emerged as a prominent resident of Bourbon County. And to give you a quick snapshot of Bourbon County on the eve of the Civil War, right, Hawes has emerged in his early 60s as an influential member of Bourbon County society. I'm going to give you some information from an article by Ken Williams and James Russell Harris. It's a statistical analysis of the 1860 census, right? The thing that historians love the most are statistical analyses and throwing numbers at you. That's not true. I just have numbers, and a friend here, Stuart Sanders, pointed me to this article to give you some context of what Bourbon County looks like in 1860. Its population falls just short of 15,000 individuals, about 14,860 if you want a really specific number. 45%, almost 46% of those individuals are enslaved African Americans. 6,767 to be precise, live within Kentucky. Not in Kentucky, in Bourbon County. There's a few more that are in Kentucky. That makes Bourbon County the fourth largest county for enslaved population in the entire state, trailing behind places like Jefferson County and Fayette County, most notably. And I realize I've now listed 3 of the top 4, and I don't remember which the 4th one was. So I've walked into that one. But Bourbon County has the 4th most number of enslaved persons in the state. It is also extremely wealthy. It's the 3rd wealthiest in terms of real estate and personal property. It's got the 3rd most improved acreage. It's got the 5th most manufacturing establishments. I think you're right. I think it is Woodford or Scott. It's one of those central bluegrass counties. The short order of that, right, is there's a large number of enslaved individuals. There's a great deal of wealth that is concentrated in Bourbon County. Bourbon County is poised as an influential part of Kentucky politics. Hawes is a leader in Bourbon County, and the institution of slavery is extremely important to individuals in Bourbon County. Hawes, I believe, owns 5 or 6 enslaved people in the 1850 census. There's no record of it. He doesn't appear in the 1860 slave census. So I don't know if that doesn't mean he just wasn't recorded or if he doesn't own any enslaved people in 1860. So what you have on the eve of the Civil War is a county that is extremely wealthy and centered right in the bluegrass, and Richard Hawes is an influential member of that society. So that brings us, most importantly, into 1860, right? It's an election year this year for us, and 1860 is an extremely important election year for Kentuckians and residents of Bourbon County. It's a 4-way race between Abraham Lincoln running as a member of the Republican Party, Stephen Douglas running as a Northern Democrat, Kentuckian John Breckinridge running as a Southern Democrat, and John Bell choosing to ignore the issue of slavery completely and run as an American Union Party candidate. In Bourbon County, to break down some more numbers for you, I promise these are going to be some of the last numbers that I'm going to throw at you for the rest of today. Bourbon County votes overwhelmingly for John Bell, 996 votes for Bell. I guess I shouldn't say overwhelmingly. There's 750 individuals who vote for Breckinridge, and then a paltry 29 for Douglas and 3 for Abraham Lincoln. In fact, Abraham Lincoln will only score double digits in roughly about 16 out of the 120 counties in Kentucky in the election of 1860. He doesn't do that much better in 1864. He only secures about 30% of the vote in Kentucky. But as we know, right, the larger national narrative is that despite the lack of support in Bourbon County and in Kentucky and throughout the rest of the South, Abraham Lincoln is elected by a Northern vote. And this angers many Southerners, right? It provokes South Carolina into seceding and other Deep South states following. In Kentucky, though, there is a brand of the Democratic Party, right, that controls the state and that Hawes is a part of, that we would call pro-slavery Unionists, or at least pro-slavery Democrats. But they're torn and divided, right? They're not openly for secession. The state itself becomes deeply divided, and we can talk about this as we go. Hawes himself will claim that he's not a secessionist, but he is in favor of the institution of slavery and eventually joins the Confederacy because he becomes a Confederate governor of Kentucky. As the nation is falling apart, right after the attack on Fort Sumter, after Confederates have fired and Lincoln has called up troops and the Civil War has begun, in Kentucky, the legislature calls for a council of 6 individuals, including sitting Governor Beriah Magoffin, former presidential candidate John Breckinridge, and one Richard Hawes, to meet to discuss what the state should do. Hawes, Breckinridge, and Magoffin call for a secession convention, but the largely Unionist legislature and the Unionist members on this council are able to forestall and prevent a secession convention. Through preventing this convention, Kentucky decides to be neutral. Right? And I realize I might not be shedding on any ground that you're all unfamiliar with. I'm, again, kind of framing that context, right? Kentucky declares itself neutral, right? They will maintain armed neutrality, and they wish to side with no one. This mostly benefits Unionists in the state. It gives them time to consolidate power and to preserve some sense of order and prevent a rash call for secession or remaining in the Union. So it buys Unionists time. Home in Bourbon County, Richard Hawes, I almost said Beriah County and Magoffin, I literally almost said like every other name but Richard Hawes, remains back in Bourbon County. And in the summer of 1861, he pens a broadside to the people of Bourbon County, blaming Republicans and Lincoln for the cause and the cause of the war and the bloodshed. And again, while reinforcing the fact that he's not a secessionist, he, quote, calls for a recognition of the independence of the Southern Confederacy and an equitable assumption of the national debts and a just partition of the partisan partnership property, end quote, between the federal government and the federal government and the national government and the Confederate government. Again, Hawes lays all of the blame for the Civil War, and he writes this broadside with 7 other influential residents of Bourbon County. He lays all of this blame at the hands of Republicans and Northerners, and he calls for peace. He'll accept a separate Confederacy, but what he really wants and what other Kentuckians want, regardless of whether they side for the Union or the Confederacy, is the preservation of slavery. And this point, as we'll return to, is extremely important, especially after the Civil War. Hawes's hopes, though, for a peaceful resolution in 1861 to the Civil War and Kentucky's role in the war is dashed when, in September of 1861, Leonidas Polk invades Kentucky. When he marches into Kentucky, Union troops respond and check his advances into Western Kentucky, and more importantly, Unionists in the legislature and throughout the state are able to call together and galvanize their supporters to keep Kentucky in the Union. Hawes, with his broadside and with his speeches and roles in pushing for a secession convention early in the crisis, fears for his safety. 3 of his sons will enlist in the Confederate Army, and Hawes himself, at the spry age of 64, will enlist to be a quartermaster in the Confederate Army under General Humphrey Marshall, serving mostly in southeastern Kentucky and western Virginia. But while Hawes runs off to southeastern Kentucky to borrow from the title of Anne Marshall's book about Kentucky, other individuals like George W. Johnson from Scott County have to worry about how do you create a Confederate government of Kentucky. Unlike other southern states, Virginia, Mississippi, South Carolina, any of the southern states that joined the Confederacy at the start of the war, or even at the start of the secession crisis or at the start of the Civil War, did so taking, by and large, if not their entire population, the state bureaucracy with them. in many ways, Confederate Kentuckians are now they're building the plane while they're flying it, right, to use a modern expression. They don't have the apparatus of government, right? They don't control Frankfort, they don't control the legislature, they don't control the purses, they don't control essentially the military or the militia organizations of Kentucky. They have some control over some of the militia organizations, but not entirely. So in November of 1861, right, in Russellville and in Bowling Green, Confederate Kentuckians start to gather. Between November 18th and November 21st, they hold a provisional council or provisional meeting to create a Confederate government. They elect George W. Johnson to be the first provisional governor and create this Council of 10 that serves as a quasi legislature. 60 representatives from 60 counties come together. We have digitized this resource, essentially the account book of what happens in this provisional government meeting in Russellville on CWGK. It's pulled from the Filson Historical Society's collection. And it shows, right, the discussions of how they are trying, again, right, to build the plane while it's in midair, or we might want to say mid-free, not quite mid-free fall at this point, but as the plane is in the air, right, they are trying to, okay, how do we build a government? How do we fund a government when we don't control the tax collecting apparatus, when we don't have access to the armories, when we don't have access to any of the bureaucratic structure? My former colleague, Patrick Lewis, would describe he wrote a blog post for CWGK kind of describing this process, and it's more or less, right, the Confederate government of Kentucky is essentially showing up at a home and being like, this is a government building now, please give us your guns and money. Trying to like strong arm bank loans and strong arm guns out of Unionists in the southwestern parts of the state. It's a kind of a cobbled together affair that's disorderly. And it's not helped by the fact that not long after this provisional government's formed, Ulysses Grant's operations in Tennessee at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson force Albert Sidney Johnston and the Confederate forces in Kentucky to retreat. George Johnson retreats with the Confederate forces, and he'll retreat all the way back to the Battle of Shiloh, where, seeing the desperate situation as Confederate forces are fighting against Ulysses S. Grant at Pittsburgh Landing and at the Battle of Shiloh, George Johnson will enlist as a private in the Confederate Army. And he'll be mortally wounded at the Battle of Shiloh. He'll die, and CWGK has letters from Johnson, right, that he's writing before and on his deathbed to his wife. And this leaves a vacancy at the top of who should run the Confederate government. Naturally, the Council of 10 turns to Richard Hawes, who is proved to be nothing but a thorn in the side of Humphrey Marshall. As an influential politician and a quartermaster, he writes frequently or tries to visit Richmond, Virginia to speak with Jefferson Davis, essentially circumventing any rational chain of military command. And in doing so, frustrates Humphrey Marshall to no end. Hawes resigns in February of 1862, and several months later, he's appointed the new Confederate governor of the second and last provisional governor of Confederate Kentucky. Hawes spends most of his time as an exile, right, following the Confederate Army of Tennessee around, or going to Richmond, Virginia, trying to raise money or convince Jefferson Davis or Confederate congressmen that, hey, Kentucky's actually a state in the Confederacy. Please give us money and guns. Please help us become anything other than just a ragtag band of people following an army around central Tennessee. Which, from my perspective, right, running a digital documentary edition that collects papers that pass through the desks of these offices, Hawes is the one we have the least amount of information on, simply because he's never in the state. He's always out wandering about, and we do have at some point, right, we have 20,000 documents that we'll eventually have up on the site. We clearly don't have enough. We'll have to go to DC and Duke and the University of North Carolina and pray that we can find in other collections more of the documents that relate to Hawes. But Hawes spends most of his time outside of the state. That is up until Braxton Bragg launches his invasion of Kentucky in the summer of 1862. In August, his Heartland operation begins, and Hawes will leave Richmond and travel to Tennessee and then back up into Kentucky to meet up with Braxton Bragg. They meet September 30th in Danville. They then go to Lexington, and Bragg astutely pays no attention to the federal army that's amassing to his north and about him, and Bragg goes what we must do is we must install Richard Hawes as governor of Kentucky and Frankfort. So the Confederate forces occupy Frankfort, and they take Hawes to Frankfort, where he'll be officially inaugurated as a Kentucky governor. Bragg and Hawes believe that this is an important thing for Kentuckians to see, to rally Kentuckians to the cause. Bragg gives a short speech on the steps of the State House, what is now the Kentucky Historical Society's old state capitol, and Hawes follows up. And he gives a long speech where he talks about this struggle between the North and the South, calling on Kentuckians to rally and to, quote, break through the forms and shackles of armed power that in order that they may attain the substance of freedom and independence. And he goes on and he lambasts the Lincoln administration and he lambasts Northerners. And towards the end, he notes that, quote, I assume the duties devolved on me as provisional governor to give you an opportunity to take your stand and make your choice in this abolition war. It's quite clear that this war has now become, in October of 1862, a war over the institution of slavery. Quote, and to decide fully and fairly whether you will cast your destiny with the North or the South, end quote. It's slightly ironic that as Hawes finishes up this talk, right, he's laid down what his vision of the Civil War is, right? It is this battle. It's an abolition war over the fate of the institution of slavery, but also Kentuckians now must decide in the fall of 1862, perhaps weather like we have today, right, in the cool, chill air, they have to make a decision. Are they fighting for the Confederacy? And the words at 6:30 on a Tuesday are failing me, for the continuation of a slaveholding republic, or will they fight for the North? And again, it's important to note here, right, that most Kentuckians, regardless of what side they are on, the United States or the Confederacies, they're still fighting for the institution of slavery. They're still fighting for the preservation of that institution, regardless of what side they are fighting on. But Hawes makes that quite clear. And I said it's ironic because Hawes finishes up his talk, but he doesn't get to finish his dinner, because as they're throwing a banquet on the lawn outside of the state capitol, gunfire is heard not too far away. Those federal troops I mentioned a few moments ago that Braxton Bragg didn't pay attention to, well, they've come knocking. And Braxton Bragg has to essentially evacuate Frankfort quickly. Richard Hawes, to his embarrassment, right, is essentially pulled out of Frankfort going, yep, nope, you've been in Frankfort for an hour and a half, congratulations, you don't get to finish your inauguration. So Hawes flees, and that's after the Battle of Perryville 4 days later on October 8th. Bragg is defeated and the Confederate Army is kicked out of Kentucky. And that is, for the remainder of the Civil War, the last kind of measure of Hawes' administration in the state. It spends the rest of its time in Tennessee, Georgia, and North Carolina, fleeing from Sherman and other Union commanders as Union forces push deeper and deeper into the heart of the Confederacy. So in that remainder of that time, right, Hawes is spending time trying to appeal for funds for recruits in Kentucky. John Hunt Morgan is raiding through Kentucky, but more or less the war will end with Hawes in exile. It ends in April of 1865. We can talk about the fact that there's ships and some fighting that continue well into the summer of 1865. And, there's no clear end, right? It's not just Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox and the war ends. There's a series of messy ends to the Civil War. But by and large, for our purposes, the Civil War ends in the spring of 1865. And by June of 1865, Richard Hawes has returned to Bourbon County, Kentucky. He returns with a pardon from President Andrew Johnson. And I like to imagine, and I'm creating a purely fictional scenario here. Do not take this does not happen, but I think it serves the purposes of what I want to talk about, the connections between Hawes and the African-American community fairly well. I imagine Hawes arrives, he comes off of a train and steps off at a train station in Paris in June of 1865. Again, full disclosure, fictional situation here. Imagine that he looks over and he sees African-American men stepping off of that same train wearing the blue uniform of the United States Army. Bourbon County sends about 850 men to fight for the United States Army during the Civil War. 257 of those, my numbers are off. I know my math is wrong. It's roughly 850. 257 are white Kentuckians from Bourbon County. 588 of those men are African Americans, formerly enslaved men who enlist and fight for the United States Army from Bourbon County. So in this fictional scenario, I envision Hawes and these African-American soldiers are returning to Bourbon County. And what exactly is going through their heads? And again, I'm creating this fictional scenario, but what would be going through their heads as they meet and they have this encounter? We don't have Hawes's writings exactly on this, but I think we can actually turn to a speech by another Kentucky governor that's on CWGK, Thomas Bramlett, his December 1865 speech before the General Assembly. When Hawes returns in the summer of 1865, slavery still exists. It still legally exists in the state of Kentucky. Kentucky, aside from Brazil, is the last slaveholding republic in the Western Hemisphere. Slavery will exist in Kentucky until December of 1865. And that's what Bramlett is speaking on when he gives his speech to the General Assembly. He highlights the horrors of the Civil War, the destruction, both the physical, property, and economic toll it has had on the state of Kentucky. But he also speaks about the 13th Amendment, which is going into effect, or largely has gone into effect, and Kentucky is being forced to ratify. Bramlett encourages other Kentuckians to ratify the 13th Amendment. And to note, well, actually, we'll get to that in a moment. And he notes, quote, that, quote, freedom is national and is therefore more appropriately declared so to be through the federal constitution than by local or state action, end quote. Right? Freedom is national. It is a natural right of all human beings. As declared, he cites the Declaration of Independence, right? The idea that all men are created equal, although Bramlett doesn't necessarily believe that line, but that all men have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he encourages Kentuckians to accept the 13th Amendment because the Civil War has proven that a conflict over the preservation of slavery cannot be won by the South. Slavery is dead. But Bramlett adds an important line a few paragraphs later. He notes, quote, franchises other than freedom are political, not natural, and are left to the states respectively to regulate for itself. I'm going to end the quote there and sub out some other not terribly politically correct language in 21st century America. But Bramlett goes on to note that African Americans are well noted for their inability to self-govern themselves and also others. What Bramlett is essentially saying is slavery is dead, but what we don't have to do is we don't have to give the right to vote to African Americans. And by darn it, we are going to ensure that African Americans don't get the right to vote. That idea is something that will motivate Richard Hawes and other white Kentuckians, right? As Anne Marshall has talked about in her book, Creating a Confederate Kentucky, many individuals see Kentucky as the 12th Confederate state, but that it secedes from the Union after 1865. Kentucky adopts, because of its stance, both pro-slavery unionism and pro-slavery Confederates, a vision after the war that feels betrayed by the federal government and looks to control and limit the freedoms of African Americans. And this story is not unique to Kentucky. It is one shared throughout much of the South. But what I want to do is, Cheryl, is it okay if I share my screen for a moment and show an image? I'm going to just, for a moment, share my screen because I want to flip the coin and I want to talk about in that fictional scenario what those African American soldiers may have been thinking about. Oh, or I won't. Oh, I'm the host now. All right. Yeah, I can share my screen. I just have to find it. No. Okay. 1 second. Yes, do you guys see this image of emancipation? No? Okay. Okay, well, I think that was well as I'd hoped. Give me 1 second. It would be nothing without some small technical difficulties, right?
I saw it earlier, the first time.
Oh, do you see it now?
Not now, but I saw it the first time.
Okay. How about now?
I can, let's see.
Sorry.
And then it went away.
Okay. Interesting.
The etching was up, and then you switched, and we saw your computer screen again.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna try it again. At least this isn't being recorded, right? There we go. How about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, there we go. Excellent. So this is an image that I use I used to use when I would teach, and then when I do teach emancipation and the aftermath of the American Civil War. It is published in Harper's Weekly in 1863, in January of 1863. And so it is a drawing, an etching that is created by a white man, but I believe, based on what I've read and what I know about African-American history, it speaks very much to the desires of African Americans. The title of this is The Emancipation of the African American. I'm changing a slight word there. January.
Sorry, but it's gone again.
Yeah,
Yeah, we just see you.
it's gone again? Oh no.
Yeah.
I can still see it.
I see it. I see
Okay.
it.
You see it? Okay.
All right, it must be me. All right, thanks. Sorry.
Okay. Nope, that technological issues, this is the new world, right, of Zoom. But most of you can see it.
Yes.
So this image, it says emancipation at the top. On the left-hand side, it talks about the past, right? And I apologize if I don't know how well you can see it, but in the top left, there are slave catchers chasing after freedom-seeking African Americans. In the middle left, there is an auction block where an African American is being sold off. In the bottom left, there's a whipping or a beating that is taking place of an enslaved African American. On the flip side, there is the future, or what the promise of emancipation is. There are African American soldiers up here who have enlisted and are fighting in the Union Army. There are African American children that are going off to school. You might not be able to see it, but in the bottom right here, this says cashier. There's African Americans that are collecting their pay, control over their labor and their income. This is what the promise of emancipation is. But most importantly, at the heart of all of this, the image that's the most clear at the center, is the African American family gathered together, not broken up by masters selling their human property off for a profit or as punishment, not beating or killing African Americans, but African American families that are reunited, that have control over their education, their opportunities, and also their income. This, I believe, is the idea of what many African Americans, right? Historians write about how African Americans will travel the South trying to find loved ones sold away or families that were broken up, moving in together with family units, trying to recreate their homes and control their homes. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can stop worrying about who sees that and any of the technological issues. This is why I'm glad I did do a PowerPoint, because it would have just been numerous other issues. That image, though, I think helps sets up this idea, right? We have Bramlett's speech, which is talking about slavery's dead, but we're not giving African Americans voting rights. And African Americans, right, certainly voting is important to them and it will become important, but also maintaining the family and maintaining control of their lives is extremely important. So what I want to do, I know I've talked for a while, I want to talk about a couple of things that happened post-war in Bourbon County. When Hawes returns in 1866, he'll be elected, so I make sure I get it right, he'll be elected judge of the Bourbon County Court in 1866, and then again in 1870 and 1874. He'll maintain this position until he dies in 1877. And in 1866, he'll also be elected the Master Commissioner of the Circuit and Common Pleas Courts. Essentially, Hawes becomes one of the main judicial figures of Bourbon County in the aftermath of the Civil War. So what I want to do is I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about apprenticeships and I want to talk about voting. I'm going to read one short newspaper, part of a short newspaper article from Collins History, Volume 1, published in 1874 of Kentucky. In 1867, or I'm slightly disagreeing with Lowell Harrison here based on what the book says. Lowell Harrison, a famous Civil War historian on Kentucky. I have no right to disagree with him. Sometime between 1867 and 1869, Richard Hawes makes a decision about an apprenticeship contract. So I'm just going to read to you what the book says, and then I'm going to talk about it a little bit more and break a little bit of it down. January 16th, Judge Richard Hawes of the Bourbon County Court on habeas corpus releases from apprenticeship and remands to their mother 2 minor colored children, declaring these and all other contracts of apprenticeship by the agents of the Freedmen's Bureau in Kentucky null and void. The provision of the law establishing said bureau are not applicable to Kentucky, but to those states only which have been in rebellion and where the ordinary process of law was suspended by armed force. I find it ironic that Richard Hawes, who was in open rebellion against the federal government, makes that statement about the state of Kentucky. But this is an important decision that Hawes does, and it gains some national attention. But to explain it, though, I want to break down two things. First, the Freedmen's Bureau, and then what apprenticeships are. The Freedmen's Bureau was created after the Civil War. It's technically the Bureau of Refugees, to help assist poor whites and African Americans throughout the South. It helps construct schools. It provides legal assistance, food, and medical care. Often used in tandem with the Union Army, you can think of it as the bark and the bite of emancipation. The United States Army. The Freedmen's Bureau is the ones who are legally advocating and working on the ground, getting teachers and educators and resources to African Americans as they are building their lives during the Reconstruction period. They're helping rebuild the nation, bringing 4 million enslaved African Americans into the fold of citizenship. Historians like Hannah Rosen and many others have commented on the fact that as long as the Freedmen's Bureau and the Union Army are working together, they can help African Americans, whether it's in Bourbon County, Kentucky, or throughout the former Confederacy, leverage their newfound freedoms and gain access to political or social rights. Apprenticeships, in this context, are not what we would think of apprenticeships from the 18th or the 19th century, where someone would decide to apprentice with a master and become a cobbler or a wheelwright or some type of trade skill. Apprenticeships in the aftermath of the Civil War are used under what are called black codes. They are created and imposed immediately throughout the South, where the court has the right to control, essentially remove children from the custody of a parent and send them off to an apprentice. They use these specifically to target African American families. And they create any number of rules or exceptions to take African American children away and often return them to their former masters, providing these former masters with a form of labor. And if we reflect back on that image that you may or may not have been able to see, breaking up control of the family of African Americans. So these black codes would use any number of rules, inability to pay taxes, violations of vagrancy laws or other rules about African Americans gathering, the lack of education of a family, or lewd behavior. And this one was common, right? The marriages of enslaved people were not recognized, right, by county courts, or they had no legal standing in white Kentucky or white Southern society. They were, in theory, then, to these courts living in sin, and they would highlight the immorality of the African American parents and remove the children. So I tried to find more about this court case specifically, and apparently in a pandemic, it's really hard to track down a bunch of different archives that are opened in various levels to the public. But my interpretation of this is Hawes is not striking down the apprenticeships, right? He's striking down the fact that the Freedmen's Bureau itself is interposing and using itself between the court and African Americans. So what Hawes is doing is he's using this, and perhaps there's another family member, right? Perhaps the husband and wife were split, and the husband had apprenticed the children out through the Freedmen's Bureau. I don't know that for certain, right? I'm trying to be very transparent in the informed, educated guesses that I'm making. But Hawes is striking down not the idea of apprenticeships. He's returning control of those apprenticeships to the courts, where run by white men, they can determine the course of African American families. They can control the flow of labor of African Americans in some small way through these apprenticeships. That's one thing that happens. And this is not, right, I'm not specifically calling out Bourbon County. I'm not specifically calling out Kentucky. This happens throughout the South. And the Freedmen's Bureau receives a great deal of pressure when they try to make these decisions or interpose themselves. And they can really only do so with the backing of the United States Army. They're terribly underfunded and not terribly able to influence, without support, they're not able to always enforce their will. The other thing I want to talk about really briefly, because I realize it's getting close to 6:50 and I have talked quite extensively, is about voting. Despite Bramlett's assurances, right, that freedom was national and local control would remain, the 15th Amendment comes about in 1870, right? This is the 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment. The 100th anniversary, right, of the 19th Amendment, the two amendments that race and sex cannot be barriers, or race and gender cannot be barriers to voting rights. Charles Davis has a really great article in the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society from 2010 that talks about Bourbon County specifically, using it as a case study to talk about race and how it impacts voting patterns and democratic politics in Bourbon County. It runs from about 1877 to 1889 or 1890, so after Hawes has passed away. But there are a couple of instances that I think this leads to Hawes and a connected experience of race being an important factor in voting. African Americans, who make up roughly 47% of Bourbon County towards the end of the 1860s, early 1870s, largely favor the Republican Party, party of Lincoln, the party that has destroyed the institution of slavery and won the Civil War. So there's a few instances. Perrin's book on Bourbon County history, Bourbon Scott County history, if you've ever looked at that, highlights, I think it's on something like page 97. Clearly I've been spending too much time recently in these books, how right is about as African Americans are to vote. Two districts, or two communities, Claysville and Ruckerville, that are affiliated with Paris, are redistricted to take those two communities out of the Paris voting districts to prevent African Americans from voting for a Republican mayor. Republicans still are able to capture the mayoral election that year, but later impositions, a per capita tax applied before voting, ensured, quote, that since that time, the Democrats have carried the city at each election by a decided majority. That book is originally published in 1882. And Davis's article goes on to talk about how Democrats in Bourbon County will use the specter of African Americans supporting the Republican Party to motivate whites to vote, to prevent African Americans and Republicans from gaining control of local elections and local offices. Those become the most important things for them to protect. So there's this policy that emerges from the 1870s carrying through the remainder of the 19th century to use race and to control who can vote, who can be a part, or at least how people can be a part of the electoral process and voting rights in Bourbon County, Kentucky. And I want to wrap up quickly because I realize I've talked a lot. But again, using CWGK, using Hawes, and using these documents, what I've tried to talk about, right, is this idea of who is a part of Kentucky society, who is included, and how we can use papers and documents connected to this one project and one man to build out and talk about some of these larger issues that if you paid attention to social events and current events today, not to get on any political soapbox, but right, the legacies of the Civil War and the unresolved questions of emancipation and racial equality stick with the United States today, and they are still questions that we need to tackle. And we can see that through CWGK, Hawes, and these events. So again, thank you for letting me talk and dealing with the technical issues and letting me talk to you a little bit about what I do and some interpretations we can make. I'm happy to continue talking and answer questions.
Thank you, Chuck, for that. It was really informative for me anyway. I will open it up. Does anybody have any questions for Chuck? We have a little bit of time left here. Don't forget to unmute yourself if you have a question.
You are unmuted.
Hmm?
You are unmuted if you want to say something. If you got a question.
It would be about the Bourbon County history by
Everman?
yeah, Hank Everman.
Okay. You're welcome to answer that.
Have you read Hank Everman's?
No, Hank, I did not get a chance to get across that one. Would you recommend it?
It's
Well,
pretty good.
Yes, I guess.
The second part, the second book.
The second, yeah, especially. Yes.
Happily, I will take a look at that.
Okay. It is so interesting, and you paint a picture that is quite believable.
Yeah.
And
Good. I hope it was believable. I hope I didn't sound like I was off my rocker.
no, you did.
But people generally accuse me of that at work, so it
I mean,
would not be. I
most of us,
don't think that's actually the case, but
when we think about the war and that period, it had to have been chaotic
As he
in
said.
Bourbon County. Absolutely chaotic.
I think the general frame, right? One of the questions I did a podcast relatively recently. It hasn't come out yet, or at least I haven't heard it came out. But I was interviewed, and right, one of the questions I was asked was, "What's the most surprising thing?" Right? I always feel I should also mention, right? Like I've tried to be very transparent as I've been going through this. I think one of the most important things for historians are to be transparent about how we do the work we do and the conclusions we draw. So right, I'm not a native Kentuckian. In many ways, I feel very strange running the flag, like one of a large project about Kentucky and the Civil War, right? I know how deeply proud Kentuckians are of their work, and I feel like I'm adopting many Kentuckian isms and becoming a Kentuckian. I'm becoming an adopted Kentuckian. But I recognize, right, also, like I'm a Northerner who has come in and runs this project, and I try to be very respectful of that idea that I don't always know everything. But the question I got asked in this podcast was, what surprises you the most about Kentucky? And I'm like, oh, everything's chaotic here. If you read the guerrilla letters, right, we have a subset of like 80 or 90 letters that talk about guerrilla warfare in Kentucky. And everything is just very interesting and very chaotic during the Civil War. And I imagine, right, Bourbon County and all, I don't think any county escapes that chaos. And that's what makes this project both like terrifying and also very fascinating.
Anna, do you have a question? I know you have to go soon.
Oh, it was just several kinds of things. I was just trying to fill them out. Chuck,
Yeah.
are you familiar with the Reverend Elisha Green?
Yes.
Because even though he wasn't involved in the Civil War, he helps flesh out the picture for African Americans and what was going on with us during that particular time period. And it's my understanding that although a lot of the Union, I can't think of what you call them when they're leaving the service, it showed them as being Bourbon Countyans. A lot of those African Americans weren't necessarily from Bourbon County, but they just had Bourbon County as their place of
right. It could have been place of enlistment or something along those lines. So you're entirely right. And right, that article I was using, I think it's from 2005, and I was trying to awe you all with numbers, right? Like that was part of the intention. And I think that I'll have to honestly look into that about the numbers. Broadly speaking, right, there's about 120 to 140,000 Kentuckians who enlist in the Civil War, and this is maybe a better way to frame the narrative instead of just bringing it down to Bourbon County. About 100,000 of those men serve in the Union Army. Roughly about 23,000 of those are African Americans, formerly enslaved men who will enlist and fight, and they mostly enlist between 1864 and 1865. And that fictional scenario I created with the whole train thing, it's probably unlikely to happen because most of the United States colored troops, the USCT, actually spend time in Texas and Louisiana in occupation duty, carrying them into 1866 or 1867. I have a friend from West Virginia who's writing about African-American troops at the end of the Civil War and how many of them are like protesting. And I've read letters of like, hey, we want to go home. The war is over. And it's like 1866 and they're in Texas and there's like, I'm not going to finish that thought on a recorded document about like recorded webinar about like trash talking them in like the middle of nowhere, Texas. But they're like, we're in Texas. We want to go home. There are tumbleweeds here.
And later on, they would. We had a great uncle who was involved in one of the the incidents in Texas when they were falsely accused and they were killed and all of that. So the African American troops did really want to come home. That Texas was not their home.
Yes, very much so.
Well, the other thing too is that with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments,
yes,
it's my understanding that they weren't ratified until 1976 when May Street Kidd from Bourbon County had them officially ratified by the Kentucky legislature, the General Assembly.
I will be honest, I definitely need to look into that. We're ratified until when?
1976, and May Street Kid, she was an African-American from Millersburg, and actually her book is Passing for Colored, because she was one of the African-Americans who really passed, except everybody here knew that she was Black, but if she was someplace else, you didn't know.
Chuck, if I may, that is accurate. It's
Yeah.
the 13th Amendment that was ratified. Kentucky and Mississippi were the last two states to ratify the amendment in the 1970s. Of course, you need 2/3 of the states to ratify amendment and make change to the Constitution. And so there were enough states to ratify at that time to pass said amendment, to ratify said amendment. And when a state ratifies an amendment, it's filed with the National Archives. And in the case of Mississippi, they just never sent it.
Wasn't there the Daily Show episode? The Daily Show episode from a couple of years ago where they're like, oh, by the way, we just found this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it was 2012 when they found it.
Yeah, I was in grad school. You're very much right. And I think the context, right, of Bramlett's speech that I highlight in December of 1865 is like, look, we can't do anything about this. What we can do is we can't control the 13th Amendment. It was passed while Southern states were out. It is the law of the land. What we have to accept is slavery is dead. Fine. You know what we don't have to accept? Politically enfranchising African Americans. That is the subtext of his speech. And right, again, I don't have a Hawes document that I can point to and say, yeah, Hawes agrees with that. I'd bet my meager government salary, though, that Hawes probably does agree with the sentiments of that, right? And we can see from the events that happened in Bourbon County that is probably policy, right? Hawes is on a short list in 1871 to be governor, or to run for governor as a Democratic candidate. When the presidential election of 1876 is contested, there's a meeting in Louisville. Hawes is one of the influential members of the Democratic Party that is there talking. He or someone there is talking about getting 10,000 angry and armed Kentuckians to march on Washington to protest the idea that Samuel Tilden, who has essentially won the election but is not being given the victory, is being denied, right? The Democratic Tilden is being denied the White House. And so Hawes, yes, that is a long way of me agreeing with you and being me and rambling too much.
What about this idea of apprenticeship being used to prolong slavery? On what legal grounds did that exist?
So there is, I don't know the specific legal titles, but there are state statutes, and then these will be recodified in what are called black codes. But there are standing court orders essentially that say, and they could do this to white families as well, right? But it's the way it's applied to target African Americans. But
like everybody was an indentured servant.
It's essentially how it would work, right? That's a very basic definition, right? The idea would be that the apprentice would be given to a responsible, we'll say it's like a social service, right? Would be given to a responsible citizen who would take care, would feed, clothe, and kind of foster. Maybe fostering is a good way to look at it. Foster the individual. But again, these are largely applied directly at African Americans in southern states after the Civil War. It's almost immediate, right? The war ends and they're like, hey, black codes can't gather in groups of more than 6 or 10. You can't drink, you can't own a gun, you can't be in the city limits after dark. Or I'm listing off some generic what are called black codes, and they vary by place to place, but they are used to essentially codify or recreate a version of slavery, and this translates into chain gangs and other forms of social and judicial control over African Americans that continues long after the Civil War.
One of the ways that this happens, the apprenticeship is enforced is through Kentucky's vagrancy laws, and that's a part of those black codes that Chuck is talking about. And so one of the things that happens is, of course, during slavery, you know, there's adults, there's children, but nonetheless, these ancestors are viewed as commodities, they're property. And if you have these vagrancy laws that say, you know, you can be arrested if you're unemployed, you know, if you're unemployed for a certain duration, which could have been, you know, 20 minutes, whatever. But it's a way to hold on to the children as property. And so, like Chuck said, they're breaking up families, but when you have Black people at this time who are entering into, primarily, we're looking at agricultural labor, but in the case of Black women, we're looking at domestic labor. And so you have folks in, you know, working in white homes, and at some point you have former enslavers who just refuse to give up the folks that they're holding in bondage, basically, is what happens. And a way to keep the children is through these so-called apprenticeships. And it could have been domestic labor, it could have been some sort of smithing, blacksmithing, coppersmithing. It could have been a whole host of things, but they're used to employ Black children, and they'll label them as orphaned or abandoned, poverty-stricken. That's how they're able to retain these children in the homes of these former enslavers.
Within Bourbon County, there are newspapers that, you know, Garrett Davis, who was a senator, and Brutus Clay, very prominent Bourbon County citizens, were indicted basically by the Freedmen's Bureau for refusing to give up their enslaved people after the end of the Civil War. So it was something that was hard, I think, for some prominent Bourbon Countyans to relinquish.
Yeah, and
fairly well known.
And it's not just Bourbon County, right? Like, this is a thing that happens throughout Kentucky, and it happens throughout the South. This is why I like that image, because it gets to, by controlling children, right? If we talk about agriculture, right? African Americans largely become tenant farmers. Largely, we can parse out the term of what largely means. Many African Americans that were formerly enslaved become tenant farmers after the war, or sharecroppers, right? They are participating, often owning land on the, or tilling land on the property of their former enslaver, their former owner. If their children are not there to help them, right? If they are remanded into the custody of another white person, right? They don't get the benefit of the labor of that family member helping them out on their property, meaning they'll be less productive, they'll make less money, they'll be less likely to break out of a cycle of dependency upon their former white owner or the person that they're renting land from. And it really kind of prevents them from having all of the control that freedom is supposed to give a family. I could have gotten into that, but I felt like I was already talking about way too much stuff, but I'm glad that it came up organically here.
I would be interested to learn the role that the church played in perpetuating these apprenticeships, because I can't imagine that, you know, these are people allegedly of substance, and I'm sure they went to church. And I don't know how the role that the church really played in perpetuating this.
I don't have a specific answer, but I think I can throw some conjecture. There's a book, I don't remember, I think he's a professor at Georgetown, wrote a book, Necessary Evil, that talks about the necessary evil, where there are many Kentuckians and more broadly Southern slaveholders who will use the Bible, actually, right, to justify the institution of slavery. It is a necessary evil for us to own African Americans, because this is me speaking for 19th century Southern slaveholders, not my current views, again, we're being recorded, I want to be very clear, that African Americans are inferior and that the institution of slavery is improving their lot in life. And though it harms enslavers just as much as it harms enslaved people, that's a crock of many colors. But although it harms enslavers just as much as it harms the enslaved, it's a necessary evil to elevate African Americans. So my suspicion with that context, right, that antebellum wartime context justifying slavery using religion, that it's a necessary evil and positive good, is that they would say a similar thing about apprenticeships. That's me taking an educated guess, though. I'm making notes. These are things I'll try to look into in the 7 minutes I have a week of free time. But no, it's a really great question and something to think about.
Oh, I know Robert Jones has a book out. It's called White Too Long.
Oh.
It's a really interesting read. You might enjoy it.
I probably will. I'll add it to the list. The best thing about being an academic is there's just a continuous rolling list of things I need to read.
If you think about the churches, though, churches like the Methodist and the Baptist Church split even before the war on slavery. That's where you get the Southern Baptists and the Methodists, I guess, joined back up again at some point. But you know, there was definitely the Southern Baptists supported slavery. That's why they left the general, the main Baptist church. So I think there's not much question that the churches found a way to support slavery. And I don't imagine they supported blacks after the war either.
Oh, I could tell you about the Southern Baptists. I are one.
Have you used any as a reference any newspaper articles by the Kentuckian Citizen?
I did look through a couple. Part of the issue of COVID was figuring out where I could get copies during the pandemic. I have a list of the Paris True Kentuckian and the Paris Citizen, I believe, right, are the two newspapers. I don't know if actually the Hopewell has some of those, but I know UK had some, but they had this really weird schedule of me being able to actually get into UK. And with all of the COVID infections, I really like learning about these things, but I also really like having the ability to continue learning about them by not getting COVID. So I was running that risk of how much work can I do from KHS and my home, and I searched through Chronicling America and stuff like that. Hopefully what this is a launching point, right, for all of us. I hope to continue digging into this. I'd love to turn it into a blog post or some more, like turn this into something more for CWGK, because I love doing these outreach opportunities. I love talking about the project, and even though this is not so much just about the project, but that is definitely something I've looked into some newspaper articles, but I definitely need to dig into more.
Yeah, we have, oh, sorry, Ron.
Well, I just wanted him to devote his life to Bourbon County.
Yes.
Spend his time.
Me too, yeah.
Hey, look, you know, we are always happy to try to appease everybody, so I'll do what I can.
We do. The museum has some copies of the Western Citizen and I think of the True Kentuckian, but they're not organized necessarily by year.
Those are my favorite kind of newspapers.
The Bourbon County Citizen, which evolved from the Western Citizen, et cetera, and 200, et cetera, years of history, they have all of their original issues, but I think that UK has only digitized some of them onto microfilm. So I am sure that Becca would be happy to invite you into the newspaper offices to traipse through the newspaper and research them, but they are currently not in a digital format, but we do have here, you know, 200 years of newspapers. So it would have covered all of that significant period.
Yeah. At some point, I will tackle that. When it's not the end of the year and this is the big grant writing period for CWA. We're funded a lot by grants for our staff. We currently have a staff of one full-time person that's grant funded, one part-time person, and another person that splits their time between the library and CWGK, who's state funded. But we also used to have two other grant funded positions. So I get to spend my like holidays just writing grants.
Well, I think, it's about 7:15, and I thank you everybody for joining us and participating. We hope to continue offering, virtual programs for however long or even past COVID. So if you have any either topic ideas or speaker ideas, please feel free to reach out to me here at the Hopewell Museum. I'll put the email in the chat box if you want to drop me just a line about anything. Just happy to take suggestions for, again, either topics or speakers. Or if you are interested in coming to visit the museum, our collections. Obviously, since we are small, not everything is digitized, but we have a lot of different objects and archival material from different parts of Bourbon County and Kentucky history, just different documents, maps, old newspapers, photos, things like that. So if there is something that you're interested in, feel free to email me, and I am happy to tell you if we have something that relates to it.
Well, I just want to, I'm sorry,
go
I
ahead.
stayed longer than what I anticipated. I just want to tell Chuck thank you, because as an African American, it's often unpleasant to have a conversation around the Civil War. And I really appreciate what you shared today. And I'm like, Ron, now I just want you to focus on Bourbon County and come back and give us some more information.
I'll do what I can, but I'm glad it was a pleasant conversation. I realize the Civil War is not always the most comfortable conversation piece for everybody, and our hope for me and for CWGK, right, is to highlight more of the stories of ordinary people, right? Whenever I write grants, whenever I write it in, I talk about, it's just not talking about Unionists, it's not talking about Confederates, it's talking about everybody, African Americans, enslaved or free, rich, poor, middling. Our goal is to capture the lives of every single Kentuckian that we can. We can't undo hundreds of years of archival silences that shift one way or the other, but we can try. And that's hopefully what I did here today, and hopefully what CWGK can keep doing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Chuck. I enjoyed
night.
this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
You're
night.
welcome. Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks. Before you go,
Yeah.
Mariah Claus is about 7 years old.
Okay, so you know about Mariah Claus.
We created him in the educational offices. Tim Talbot, who used to work there, did the original
Okay.
decoration as Santa Claus, and he migrated up to your offices, I think, after Tim left about 5
Yeah.
years or so ago. So.
He has just been here as long as I've been here. So I'm actually like, he's right behind my computer. I actually can stare at Mariah Claus.
Yeah, he came from, we rescued him from somewhere. I don't remember whose office, but he goes with the clown.
Yes. Yeah, we do have, that showed up during a conference at my desk, and I was totally freaked out about it.
That came from my old office. All right, well, thank you.
Okay.
Good
Yeah,
night,
you're very
everyone.
welcome. Good night.
Good night.
You don't want to come.